Well, good evening and welcome. I'm Suzanne Hoff. I'm a board member of the League of Women Voters, Leelanau County, and with Vice President Christy Bardenhagen, we co-chair the League's 11-member Farm Labor Task Force. Now, our Farm Labor Task Force has completed 2 studies. Is this too loud? Should I back up a little bit? Back up a little bit. We've done 2 studies. First one on existing hiring practices and visa programs, and our recent study completed in 2015 came about when we asked the question, if we had the best visa program possible for guest workers, what's going to bring them this far north to Leelanau County? We interviewed workers, employers, service agencies, and what came up were quality of life issues, and one of the most important one was safe, sound housing. Now, our program tonight is seasonal worker housing for Michigan agriculture with our special guest, Connie Canfield, our guests Ginger Bardenhagen and Majid Husseini, also over here. Our co-sponsor here at the Research Center is Nikki Rothwell, Education Director for the Center. She and I will be moderating tonight's program, and this is the way we'd like it to work. Connie will be the first presenter. She'll do her formal presentation, and then we'll open it up for question and answers. We'll have a break. Our second presenters will set up. Majid and Ginger Bardenhagen will be speaking on their updates, the state updates on migrant housing inspection rules. And then when they finish, we'll have a question and answer for them. Now this means please hold your questions during their formal presentation. Now, just for those of you who may be new to a League event, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan but political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. We never, ever support or oppose candidates or parties. Men and women who are 18 years of age and American citizens may join, and our Leelanau League currently has 130 members, and a third of those are men, and they're active. Now you can find out more information on the League right outside on the table. Now I want to tell you about our first presenter, Connie Canfield. Connie earned her BA degree from MSU, and with her husband Rob, who's out here in the audience, who came up with her, they have farmed 1,000 acres of vegetables and grain using over 150 employees on their farm in Van Buren County. In 1971, she formed Women for the Survival of Agriculture in Michigan, also known as Michigan Agri-Women. And she followed that by forming American Agri-Women, a national coalition of farm women organizations. She's been a member of the Keeler Township Planning Commission, the MSU Michigan Agricultural Leadership Program, and a housing consultant for local community health association. In 1983, she organized rural initiatives for shelter and education, and in 1986 developed Sunrise Apartments and has been the site manager for that complex for 30 years. In 1988, she returned to public school teaching, along with being the site manager, as the migrant bilingual instructor for the Dowagiac schools until 2007. And today she and Rob are enjoying a much-deserved retirement. And we welcome Connie. May I just add one more thing?
You sure can.
We have some handouts that were available at the back, and if you raise your hand, you don't have them. 2 are for the Sunrise presentation, and 1 is on migrant labor housing inspection updates. So just raise your hand and it will come to you. Thank you.
Well, I thank you for inviting us and for all of you coming to hear us speak tonight about farm labor housing. After 30 years of being involved in this and 50 years of marriage to my husband, where I was involved with this, I've been involved. I want to tell you a little bit about the history of this project that you see in back of me. This is the playground area of our Sunrise Apartments, and tell you how it got started so that you can better appreciate, if you should ever decide to do something like this in your area, what will be involved. In the early 1980s, a local community health service, which was known as MARCHA, or Migrant and Rural Community Health Associations, is now known as Intercare down in our neck of the woods. It's still there. They wanted to build housing for farm workers. They pursued a very ambitious 200-unit development using a professional housing developer. And after about 2 years of going to planning meetings, meeting with local officials, getting architectural plans, they found themselves back to square one. Nothing. The USDA proved to be a pretty formidable bureaucracy to work with. Thus, in the fall of 1982, I was approached by Bobby Ryder, their CEO, and she was not only a resident of Keeler, where this housing is built, but she was a friend of mine. She was seeking someone to be a housing director for Intercare. She wanted someone who was knowledgeable about farm workers, agriculture, community, and knew a bit about politics. She asked me if I would consider the endeavor. Our youngest daughter at that time had just started first grade, so I would have some available time to explore off-farm housing versus the traditional, what you have up here is on-farm housing. Well, after talking to Rob, I agreed to give it a try, and I began that work in 1983. And I'll be very upfront. I'm not a housing consultant, and I certainly wasn't a director of any sort. I was just me. I did hold a Michigan State real estate license. That's about as close as I could even come to saying I knew anything about housing. But I believe that Bobby asked me to take on the project because I was outside of the normal advocacy groups and service groups that so often complain about the housing provided by the farmers for the workers. At that time, I had been a classroom teacher, a migrant teacher, I was a farmer. Rob and I had a large labor camp that housed farm workers. I was also pretty active locally in politics and in farm women's groups. So I think that Bobby felt that I might be able to view the situation from a few different angles than a housing developer would. And after all, Intercare's main interest was providing health care. But they still wanted this to get done because they were concerned about environmental issues for the workers. I'll tell you, back in the 1970s and 1980s, all of southwestern Michigan could have stood some support from the larger community with regard to housing farm workers. As farmers, we were continually taking it on the chin, right and left. Regulations came down on us fast and furious. We could do little right, and it seemed if one were to believe everything that was said and printed, that we were just plain evil in the eyes of the public. It wasn't our finest PR moment at all. Now, unlike some folks from my neck of the woods, I personally have always felt that if a federal program was out there Citizens should be attempting to bring that taxpayer money back home to work in their communities, whether it be for schools, roads, healthcare, parks, whatever. If a program's there, bring it home. Bring it back. Well, I've been around long enough to make the observation that while the funding levels for federal programs might change, the bureaucracy dispensing the taxpayer's dollar is very, very slow. And if a federal government had a plan that would help farm workers, well then I was ready and willing to get a piece of that pie. Well, I was to learn very quickly that although Intercare, or MARCHA, was a nonprofit organization, its mission was health care exclusively, not housing. Therefore, as a nonprofit entity, it was not, and probably never would have been eligible to participate in the 514, 15, 16 program that's offered by the USDA. And why in the world someone from the USDA didn't tell them that from the get-go is beyond me. Why they didn't just say, hey, you're not eligible. Well, once I had that figured out, I had that piece of the puzzle solved, because certainly Intercare had health care facilities. They were certainly an advocacy group. They were a nonprofit. Why shouldn't they be eligible? Housing was not their mission. So first I would have to build an organization and that met the criteria from the USDA in order to qualify for this money that was available, in order to try to bring home our share of the pie. In order to do that, I went directly up to Hastings to the USDA office, and man, did I get lucky. I met a man up there who's since retired. His name was Roy Obrighter, and he knew exactly what I had to do. I had with me on that mission Vic Warner from the Michigan Public Department of Health, who then did licensing of housing out of the Michigan Department of Health. He was with me, and Roy explained step by step by step what had to be done. Well, didn't that make my job easier? Well, you would think, wouldn't you? But that's how we ended up with Rural Initiatives for Shelter and Education. That's the name of the organization that we formed. A completely separate organization from Intercare, from MARCHA. It is a statewide membership organization. Unlike Intercare and MARCHA, who serve at the pleasure of a board of directors, we do have a board of directors, but we have to be a membership club. So some of you got the little yellow sheets. You can become a member of RISE. It only costs $5, and you are a lifetime member until you tell me you don't want to belong anymore. It's simple, and it's not hard. It's not hard. So you've got that membership form there. Just, we take checks, we take money. It was at one of these organizing soirees that I went on, because I had to have an organization that met that criteria. So I had to build it. And I ended up here in the Traverse City area building it. And it's there where I met Gary Bardenhagen at one of those meetings some 33 years ago now. And he became a member, a steadfast member. He always turns in his proxy every year, and he always gets a little annual report from me. And that's the way it works. It's not hard. Well, secondly, after building the organization, I had to say to MARCHA, 200 units is just way out of line. Way out of line. Their board of directors didn't like to hear me say that. But in my humble opinion, it was just too much for any rural township or even a rural town. It was just too much impact, way too much. And since this type of project had never been attempted, I expected some resistance. I also believed that if someone was not able to imagine that an idea might be good or reasonable or the thing to do, the idea was often squashed before it even got off the ground. So I wanted the project to have a chance. In my mind, 20 units had a chance, and that's what we ended up building. Even with the diminished size, it still took 2 years of hard work to wrestle the funding out of the USDA, and another year to get the buildings up and operating. So that was 3 years. As far as I know, RISE is the only not-for-profit organization in Michigan that currently meets the government's requirements for this money after all of these years. Of course, there are other entities that can apply. For example, you can have associations of farm workers. They can apply. Most state and local entities can apply. For instance, your township or your housing authority, they can apply for this money. They're eligible. And also, recognized Native American tribes can apply. To my knowledge, none have applied in all of these years. There is funding available, but it's small. It's small. Right now, in 2015, there was $20 million available in loan money and $6 million in grant money, and then you would fight for the RA, the rental assistance for whatever you built. Okay, that's not a lot, because that's over the entire nation, and these are competitively bid. So your competition is California, Texas, and Florida. So now you know where you stand with that. But in RISE's favor, we decided to get even more unique. We were not going to build year-round housing. We were going to do it seasonally. We're going to open it up in April. We're going to shut it down in November. Never been done. Still has never been done. So what turned out to be a unique thing turned out to be a hurdle to jump when I went to get rehab money, because guess what? They did not have a template. Now, for those of you that work with computers and government programs, if you don't have a template, you don't know how to make the computer work, and you don't know how to make it talk to the national office, and you just got problems, just big problems. So here comes Sunrise after 20-odd years of a successful project, and we don't fit the template. It was terrible. It was terrible. Anyway, if you've got my little outline in front of you, I've now come to the part. You've heard the history of how this got up and going. Took 3 years to get it up and going. I've given you a list of the things that if you decide to do something like this in your area, that this comes right out of the Code of Federal Regulations. I've summarized it for you. It's tedious reading, but there it is. The last one isn't in the code, the one that says patience. That one isn't there. I don't know why they didn't think to write that one in, because that's a really important one. To summarize, the process is slow, the money is short, and the bureaucracy is tedious, just tedious. So let's go on and talk about the challenges. You thought I was talking about those already, didn't you? Let me tell you a little bit about Keeler. Most of Keeler Township is a farming community. In the southern southwest corner, we have a small resort community, Sister Lakes, Michigan. This is where I grew up. I haven't gone far in life. When I married Rob, I had only to move 7 miles into the farmland part of Keeler Township. We are noted there for our rich, sandy loam soil. The land is good for all types of agriculture, but vegetables do extremely well here, as do cherries and apples and all of the fruit, because we're just 11 miles in from the Great Lake. So we've got that protection, the same type of protection you experience up here. Our farm worker population has changed over the years. When I first married Rob in 1966, we worked with 2 groups of folks. One group was local or jobless people migrating up from southern states, and the other group was from Texas. They did most of the harvesting of our crops. By the mid-70s, our workers were mostly all from the Valley of Texas. To my knowledge, at that time, they were all citizens of the USA, didn't have any problems or issues of that sort. But by the mid-1980s, citizenship was getting harder to define, and the Border Patrol was very, very active in our area. Keeler Township was used to migrants. We had migrants from the Valley of Texas, and in Sister Lakes, we had summer migrants, just like you do. Ours came from Chicago. Yours come from all over to come up here in the summer. So you'd think everybody'd be used to migrants, wouldn't you? Most of ours were Chicago firemen and police officers. They'd bring the families up, dump them for the summer, and they'd go back to work and travel back and forth. But regardless, I have found that people in general do not like change. People who do not live and make their paycheck from farming activities prefer that farmers and their help stay more or less invisible and in the background. They like us to keep the landscape up. They love it when our trees bloom. And they love it if we provide wildlife for hunting. Now the exception is those of you, and I think that this is more prevalent up here, who have created niche farming, I call it, where you sell your farm products to consumers directly. Consumers love that part of farming. They love it. And I thank all of you who do it. It's long hours, it's backbreaking work, but you're the PR firm for agriculture. And God knows we need it. We should all be paying you a check-off for what you do. You do a good job. In general, though, we farmers have been known to stir up dust. We spray some crops. We even spray apples in a snowstorm. That happened last week in Keeler. We have grain bins that make noise all hours of the day and night. And much to everyone's dismay, farmers are also known to keep odd hours. They may work late into the night and then start up again just as the dawn is peaking. And during this season, most farmers and farm workers work every single day. Their tractors and trucks slow traffic on rural roads. When the weather is rainy and gives them their crops and them a much-needed break, they all come to town and take over the grocery stores, the laundromats, the Target, and the Dollar General. The lines are long, the traffic is crowded, and we farmers and farm workers become visible. Ooh, scary stuff. So even though we had a farm community and rely heavily on farm workers, Rise had some local, not in my backyard, resistance to off-farm housing. And you'll have it also if you try to do it here. I'm going to give you an example of what happened. A petition was submitted to the USDA. It cited that the project would attract drug dealers and rapists. Yes, that isn't a current statement heard from politicians on CNN. That was a real concern from local Keeler residents in a petition way back in 1983. Number 2, resistance. The second winter after construction, our back 12 units were destroyed from the inside. Hooligans broke in. These are cement block buildings, folks. They pulled apart the wiring, they destroyed the furnishing, and they made a very big, expensive mess for us and for you, the taxpayer. Because these apartments are taxpayer funded. This isn't farmer funded. All of us are paying for this. And you know, after that, things got quiet, thank you God. And I haven't had anything like that happen since. So that was that local backyard resistance to a project. Now we also had some big grower resistance. I had some very big growers that are a part of RISE. But I also had some others who didn't see how this was going to ever benefit them. How could this benefit them? They felt if they didn't have the workers in their own labor camp, they would never show up for work. The workers would only show up when the work was good, but when a crop needed to be finished, the plastic needed to be pulled, the boxes needed to be collected, the workers would be sitting in the government housing watching soap operas, novellas. Well, you know, I shared some of that concern. However, given our area of the state and the variety of hand-picked and packed produce we offered, I did not feel that I should ever have many cars or trucks sitting in a parking lot at Sunrise during the season. And Sunrise tenants have not let me down on that. They are out in the fields working. You might find a grandma in the house and, you know, or a young mother taking care of children, but those people are out working. I'm pleased to say that. We had a lot of support from the general community and from our smaller farmers. Like yourself, we engaged a lot of different groups to help with this. I've always felt it was a big advantage to open it up in April and shut it down in November. Tenants know that it's just there for that amount of time. I didn't know that at the beginning, but what had happened up in the Hart-Shelby area, and many of you may be familiar with this, some of you that are my age or so, they built what was called Chapita Hills. And Chapita Hills started out as year-round farm worker housing, and they ran into numerous problems with it. The main problem being it